This is Sean with Voices of Racing, and we're doing the history of vintage Indy cars. And I have a gentleman that we're going to speak with today that's going to do the history of multiple cars he's had for a while. And you're also on the board for the IMS Museum. Chuck Jones, how are you doing today? And give us a little bit of background about how you got connected with the IMS Museum.
Sure. Well, first of all, good morning, Sean. It's great to connect with you, and thanks for the opportunity to share my story. Regarding the IMS Museum, I have gone to the Indy 500, actually attended my first race at 6 months old. I was born in December, and by May, my parents were dragging me to the race. And so it's had a deep connection with me, as with most people that are born and raised in Indiana, which I was. And so the opportunity came up to join the board. I was approached by both Tony George and Rob Dyson to come onto the board, and was honored and thrilled to do so. And have been with the board now for 3 years.
Okay, so we're going to go to your first shot here of all three of your rides. One of the goals is that when you go to these events, to the Vintage Indy events, and when you showcase your car and your cars at multiple events, is that the fans at the races, that they could end up accessing the history of these cars. So we're excited to be working with the different Vintage Indy owners. And these are also, besides windshield sheets, they also would be business size cards. But let's go back to yours. And if you could just give us a brief, we're going to get into these, but just a brief history of each, and just a little bit about each ride before we jump into each of them.
Absolutely. Well, happy to do that. So maybe starting at the lower left, the 1962 Watson Roadster is the Bill Forbes Special. This is a car that had an amazing history, an amazing run at Indianapolis. It debuted in 1962. Its last race was in 1965 at the Speedway. And then, like many roadsters, it had been cut up into a super modified and a sprint car, and led a very tough life. Today, what I was able to salvage from the car is the original drivetrain. So I have the original engine, transmission, rear end, as well as the front axle, steering components. There were a number of hard parts that I was able to trace back to this car. And so we've chosen to restore the car as in the 1962 version that was driven by Shorty Templeman. And as a side note, a gentleman by the name of Tom Malloy in California does have the original frame for this car, and he's restored it in the 1965 version, which was the Weinberger Homes car driven by Gordon Johncock. The car immediately above it, the yellow car with the number 1, is the 1972 Parnelli VPJ1. This is a super interesting car. It's one that actually won the 1972 USAC IndyCar Championship, and was driven by Joe Leonard in period. The car started off in the configuration that you see in the photo with the dihedral wings. I chose to restore the car in that version. The car evolved significantly over its life. As the chief mechanic for the car, Johnny Cable's, always told me, every race was a test session with this car. And literally every race, from race to race, there was something new, something different, something they were trying to make the car go faster. So I had to pick a point in time to restore the car, and chose to restore it in its original configuration, the way the designer Maurice Philippe originally envisioned the car. And the car is an amazing piece to drive. It generates a lot of fan interest when we take it to the various vintage Indy events on the calendar. And it's a real privilege to be able to, bring this car back and share it with the public and share it in a configuration that many don't remember, because it really raced in this configuration for literally one race before it went to conventional wings.
Yeah, just a little quick question. So the wings, how long was that configuration, used within IndyCar? Because that's something that isn't very common, and it would seem like even not even having a back spoiler on the car, that's kind of a new evolution of it. And here's another shot of that, and this is actually Mike Lashmett pushing it out there for one of the vintage Indy races, but you can really tell the height from those wings. What do you think that the real advantage was in their mind from a design aspect to have it, winged up at a diagonal like that?
Sure. No, it's a great question. So we have to keep in mind the era when this car was designed and built. So this was between 1971 and 1972. Wings were just really beginning to appear on Indy cars. McLaren had sort of shown the way in 1971 with its M16. And so there were two things that drove this particular design. One was, at the time, USAC had a rule that said that any wings need to be part of the body of the car. Now, what was interesting, between the 71 and 72 season, USAC ended up relaxing that rule. But at the time, when Maurice Philippe was designing the car, that was believed to be a hard and fast rule. And so he was really trying to come up with a solution where the wings were integral to the body of the car. The second thing that drove it is, and there's actually a patent on this, if you Google search Maurice Philippe dihedral wing patent, it will come up. But the idea was, in 1972, the IndyCar season was contested purely on ovals. There were no road courses on the calendar in 72. And so the idea here was he was aiming for something that had minimal drag in a straight line. But as the car would bank into a left-hand turn, because all the IndyCar races were counterclockwise, the inside dihedral would blank to the airflow, and it would load the left side of the car and create loading on the car while it was executing a turn, and then it would unload in the straightaway. And so he was really striving to come up with a way to selectively put downforce on the car, but only in the turns, and then have the advantage of a minimal drag configuration in the straights. Having said all that, in practicality, the car tested in this configuration. And then at Trenton, New Jersey, the race before the Indy 500 in 72, the cars raced with dihedrals, but they also had canard wings, sort of conventional front and rear wings as well. And then by Indianapolis, the next race, after practicing with the dihedrals, they were removed, and the car ran with conventional front and rear wings for the remainder of the season. In speaking with Parnelli Jones, one of the comments that he made was they were behind the eight ball, if you will. They had to literally have three cars ready to go because Unser Sr and Mario Andretti also drove on this team. And they had a very short amount of time to get the cars built and almost no testing or development time. And so Parnelli's contention was that if they had had more time to sort the car, they would have been able to make the dihedral configuration work as Maurice Philippe envisioned it. But But as it turned out, they did not. And so they had to literally turn every race in the 72 season into a test session. And it's fascinating as you look at photos of the car as it progresses through the season. You see, slight changes, different things that were tried and experimented with the car. All
right, so here's a shot you've got of it's out on the track, and is that in Milwaukee? Where did you say this was?
This was at Gateway in St. Louis, Gateway Speedway in St. Louis. This is a vintage Indy event, and we were the sort of the warm-up act for the IndyCar race at Gateway, and so this is a good shot of not only the Parnelli but also all of the other vintage cars that turn out for the vintage Indy events.
It looks like you also won a trophy. Was that at that event, and then also being on the cover of Historic Racing magazine? Give a little bit of background. I think that you'd mentioned that it was William Kimberly that was a publisher on that, and then what was the award that you won there?
Sure. So the award was from the American Speed Festival. The 2021 was the inaugural event for that. It's effectively basically the Goodwood historic event for the U.S. And put on at M1 Motorsport Concourse in Detroit. And we were fortunate enough to win the IndyCar category at the American Speed Festival, and that's what the trophy represents. The Historic Racing and Technology magazine cover came about. One of the, in the process of restoring these cars, there's always lots of people and lots of companies that help, and I'm very grateful for a longstanding relationship with Aurora Bearing in the Chicago area, and they were able to provide all of the bearings and rod ends for the car and for the restoration. And so they had asked me to provide the car for their trade show booth at the Performance Racing Industry, the PRI trade show in Indianapolis. And so I did. And during the course of that event, a gentleman walked up, introduced himself. It was William Kimberly. And we struck up a conversation that ended up stretching for almost 2 hours. And lo and behold, William turned that into a very nice article regarding the VPJ1, basically the history of the car, how I acquired it, the restoration process, and back to it running on the track again. So it was very flattering and very kind of William, not only to write an article, but then to put the car on the cover.
And here's a shot of a gentleman that drove this car back in 1972 and became IndyCar champion, Joe Leonard. Why don't you tell a little bit of history about how you got connected with him in Silicon Valley?
Yes. Well, this is a great story. So when I acquired the car and was just starting the restoration process, I worked for a company called Intuitive Surgical and designed surgical robots. And that role was based in Silicon Valley. So I was in Silicon Valley every other week doing that, doing my day job. And I knew that Joe was from the San Jose area, and did a little bit of checking and discovered that Joe was actually in an assisted living facility less than a mile from my office. So I went over, knocked on Joe's door, introduced myself, and explained that I had his car from 1972 and was in the process of restoring it. And he just lit up. And so that led to my literally visiting with Joe every other week throughout the restoration of the car. And it was just a once in a lifetime opportunity to have Joe not only see and comment as the car was coming back together, just making sure that it was restored correctly, but I was also able to connect with John Caples, who was Joe's chief mechanic in period. And so between the two of them, they were incredibly helpful in the restoration of the car, making sure all the details were correct, etc. And I would say, as a side note, probably the other highlight was the fact that I was able to periodically get Joe and Johnny, and sometimes even Robin Miller, the late journalist, on a conference call, and it was just fascinating to sit back and hear these three tell stories of not only about the car back in period, but just IndyCar racing in general.
Okay, so this is a shot of you out of Amelia Island, and you won an award. Was it for Best in Show? Is that what it was? And how many other Indy cars, as far as vintage, were out there with you that day that you were up against?
Yeah, so we were fortunate enough to win first place in the IndyCar category, in the race car category. If memory serves, I believe there were 12 cars in the category at the time, and that was really right after I'd gotten through completing the restoration of the car, and it was just there were tremendous cars in the class, a lot of stiff competition, as there always is at Amelia Island, and gratified to win a blue ribbon, literally our first time showing a car at Amelia. So nice to be able to continue that winning tradition with Chassis 102 at that event.
All right, so I want to bring it back to your Gurney Eagle. This was the 1962 Watson Roadster. So here's a shot of you working on the engine, and then also, the inside as far as the cockpit there. Here's out on the track. Where were you? And that is one great smile you got there. Where was this? What speedway was this? And just give us a little bit of overview about the car. And I think you also said that your son had worked with you, Charlie, on fixing this up. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. So yeah, so we have sort of two different cars here. So the 1962 Watson Roadster is the Bill Forbes special, and that the photos that you saw of me sitting in the car smiling were taken at Milwaukee. There's an annual event there, which I highly recommend if your listeners, go attend this event. It's an amazing thing called the Millers at Milwaukee. It's typically the second weekend of July, and just a not to miss event. The 1970 Eagle that you see Charlie working on, this was the first time that I had my son help me with a restoration. Charlie is now 18. He's a senior in high school. He's going to be attending Western Michigan University in the fall. And, he grew up seeing Dad, working on these race cars. So this was Dan Gurney's last active IndyCar ride. This is chassis 801.
And this is the shot here of Dan Gurney, right? This is him back in the day. And there's also that we could bring up here a shot of Bobby Unser. And you've got the signed photograph there. And you said this is the last time it ran, or what was the history behind this photo?
Yes. So Dan Gurney retired in September of 1970 as a driver, and Bobby Unser joined All-American Racers at that time. And Bobby took over Dan's car, chassis 801. This is chassis 801 with Bobby Unser driving in 1971 at Milwaukee, which was a great event for both Bobby and chassis 801 in that he won the race. So it's a fascinating piece of history in that it documents not only the end of Dan Gurney's IndyCar career, but it also marks the start of a long tenure with Bobby Unser and All-American Racers.
Okay. So this one, you said that you had sold, and it was to a dealer here in Indianapolis. Is that right? And their backstory also is that it ended up being on an episode of with Michael Knight and Knight Rider. If you could kind of give a little bit of the backstory here. Here's another shot of the car that morphed into this version of the vehicle. Yeah, just give us a little backstory on this vehicle and how you acquired it. Here's a shot of the original owner, and who was that, or the driver?
The driver is Steve Chassis,
Okay.
and this is one of two 1982 Gurney Eagles that were built. And this is actually in 1983 when Steve qualified the car at Indianapolis. It's a unique car in that it's powered by a Chevrolet stock block engine. So a lot of fun to drive. Really just a neat car. I acquired it for a couple of different reasons. One was it was amazingly intact. The car, other than being painted yellow for the Knight Rider episode, was amazingly original. And and I have a thing for Gurney Eagles. So this was a car that was a joy to restore. The owner was a gentleman by the name of Dick Hammond, who owned a beer distributing company, hence the Genesee beer wagon logos on the car. The chief mechanic was a gentleman by the name of Galen Fox, and Galen was incredibly helpful in the restoration of the car, and actually even connected me to the gentleman who originally painted the car in 1983, named Mike Vaughn. And so it was great to be able to take the car back to the original people that worked on it, painted it, and really helped tremendously with the restoration of the car. You had mentioned the Knight Rider episode. The car ended up in an episode of Knight Rider. It was sold to Universal.
Did you actually get a copy of this episode just for yourself, for your own archive?
It's on the internet. If you Google Knight Rider IndyCar episode, it will come up, and you'll see the beer wagon painted yellow on the screen. And then
there's another shot of it on the cover of Historic Racing, and you're in your suit there. Were you able to drive it? And if so, what tracks did you drive it on?
Yeah, so was able to drive the car at Indianapolis, which was again always an amazing experience. It's one of the things that makes all of the months of hard work restoring these cars worthwhile. Again, William Kimberly was very interested in the story of the car, so we ended up on the cover of Historic Racing and Technology again. And so we were able to run the car at both Indianapolis and Gateway. And then, at that point, I sold the car to Ray Skillman. So didn't drive the car a lot, but the short time that I did drive it, I thoroughly enjoyed it. And like I say, it's just a very rewarding, fun car to drive. That's myself and my two sons.
Now, and how old are they in this photo? I know you said Charlie was able to help you on kind of restoring these cars. Here's a shot of him as a baby with a racing helmet on, your dogs and your wife. And what's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Jill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're going to talk about the passion that your boys have for the sport, give some examples of what their involvement is and maybe what their future goals are, if any.
Sure. No, absolutely. I think, one of the things that's nice about restoring any car, it could be a car, a motorcycle, whatever it might be, it's a great way to expose kids to engineering and technology. So when we think of STEM and we think of, science, engineering, math, I taught both boys fractions by, tools and using sockets. And, it's just a very visual way to begin to expose them to not only the science and technology that goes into these cars, but also just ignite their imaginations around possibly having careers, maybe not so much in IndyCar racing, but who knows, maybe being a product development person like their dad. So both boys have been great. They attend every event that we run, as does my wife. We do it as a family. It's a way for us to not only share the cars with the fans and get them out and exercise them, but it's also a way for us as a family just to have time together. And the people we have met, the friendships we have formed through vintage Indy and vintage IndyCar racing has been tremendous. And it's been really an honor and a privilege to have my wife and my boys along for that journey.
And I just want to point out that I don't know how old Charlie was. Looks like he's 2, and he's pushing the front of that IndyCar back up in the garage. And I think that is an epic photo of dedication from birth.
Oh yeah, he would jump right in. I mean, as soon as he could walk, he wanted to be right in the middle of working on these cars, and he's still that way to this day. He loves going to the shop with dad, and having time in the shop and learning new things. And one of the things that as you can see from the shots there, from the earliest age, the poor kid didn't have a chance. He was going to get exposed to cars and racing one way or the other. So yeah, so it's
and here's another shot here, and it looks like he might be in his baby bed. Then he's out on the track as he's grown up. And who's the gentleman with you there? The older gentleman. What's the backstory there?
Yeah. So the gentleman with me in the upper left-hand photo is a fellow by the name of Floyd DeHaven. I grew up in a little town called Covington, Indiana, and my father and Floyd were best of friends. And so it was really through Floyd that I was exposed to racing. Floyd went to a track called Jungle Park, which was in Rockville, Indiana, very famous track in central Indiana. And then when I was old enough to remember, I would go along, tag along, probably just about Charlie's age, probably about 3 or 4, with Floyd and my dad and a number of other fellows, and we would go to Terre Haute and watch sprint car races. And that is my earliest memory of race cars. Really, is on a half-mile dirt track with sprint cars, and I was just hooked ever since. The photos of the go-karts are actually me. Really kind of at the end of my karting career. I ran go-karts actively up through 2003, and actually won the Midwest Road Tax Championship in 2002 and 2003. And then just about the time Charlie was born, decided going wheel to wheel with 18-year-olds probably wasn't the smartest thing, and gave that up. And then that's a photo of Charlie in his little bed that was made by a number of people at Whirlpool company in the model shop. They did that on off hours, and they were kind enough to present that to Jill and I when Charlie was born. And then his brother Owen used the same one when he came along, and we have it safely tucked away, and hopefully their kids will be able to enjoy that same little rocker race car.
So is Floyd still around? Or were you able to ever show him the other cars that you've refurbished? And then also you'd mentioned that you worked at Whirlpool. Here's a shot of a lot of different organizations you've helped over the years. Floyd first, still around. Second, have you been able to get some of the other executives you work with involved in the love of the sport? And who are some of your favorite mentors as far as drivers, as far as people that have really made a difference in the industry? Who are some of the people you worked with?
Sure, absolutely. Relative to Floyd, Floyd is no longer with us. Floyd lived to be the ripe old age of 93, but unfortunately passed approximately 10, 15 years ago now. But certainly if I look at people that outside of my own family that had a positive impact on me, just in terms of hard work, values, but also a passion around IndyCar racing. I mean, Floyd's right at the top of the list. Other people that have influenced me along the way, Tom Bigelow was a driver early on. He was the first driver to sneak me into Gasoline Alley. This would have been, oh my gosh, 1974, 1975. We had met at a local racing event, and I think he believed me when I said that somehow, some way, I want to be involved in racing, and I had just started at that point driving 3/4 midgets and full midgets, and so. Tom was somebody who really helped me out along the way. Another person is Bob Higman from Lafayette. I actually bought my first midget from Bob Higman, and he was a tremendous help along the way. Other people that I have been influenced by, or certainly, find to be very inspirational people. One is AJ Foyt. I've always been a unabashed AJ Foyt fan. And again, I think that stems from those early days at Terre Haute, seeing AJ wheeling a sprint car around a half-mile dirt track. The other people certainly that I look up to and respect would be Bobby Rahal. Bobby is somebody that I consider a friend, and we've become good friends. We both sit on the IMS museum board together, and he has been, an amazing inspiration in terms of how one brings a business approach to racing. Another, obviously, is Roger Penske, and I think what Roger has done with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway and the IndyCar Series has been very inspirational to see. And as a side note, I attended Purdue University that's where I went to college. And two of my roommates, Chuck Sprague and Grant Newberry, actually went on to work for Roger Penske. Chuck was president of Penske Racing, and Grant was their head of engineering. So a lot of connections through the years with IndyCar and IndyCar racing.
All right. Well, Chuck, this has been a beautiful road of hearing about your vintage Indy cars. This will be linked to vintageindyregistry.com to their website. And is there anything else you'd like to say to Mike about this new project, being able to kind of tell the history of the rides from the owners' mouths themselves?
Well, I think this is an amazing opportunity. I have to thank Sean, you and Mike for this opportunity. I think that anytime that when we see the cars at events and we see the cars on the track, it's a bit like an iceberg. You see the 30% above the waterline, but there's all of this great history, great stories, great connections that oftentimes people don't get to hear, don't get to understand. And so my hat's off to both Mike Lashmett, but to you, Sean, as well, for taking the time to put these histories together and to get them on a platform where they can be shared. So I really appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Well, if you could just stay on the line, I'm going to close this out. And I thank you for your history of your vintage Indy cars. Chuck, I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate it. It was a great way to spend some time together, and look forward to seeing you at the track.
All right.